Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Ayin Beis begins in the middle of a discussion about how many threads each string of the woven curtains and cloths of the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan and the Beit Kahuna were made from. We've already been through several of the materials. We're going through the remaining few. The Gemara will then describe the parts of the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash that were not removed one from the other, say that there's an issa to remove it, and explain how each of them works. And the Gemara will then go into an agadata about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So first of all, we've seen that most of the cloths of the Beis Hamikdash were made out of strings woven together, and each string was made out of 6 threads spun together into one larger string. Each material that was used in the cloth had 6 threads of that material spun together to make a large string, and then those strings were woven together. The Gemara said that there were some that were different, and the Gemara is explaining how we know that each one was different. The Gemara is up to the Me'il. The Me'il, the Gemara said, was made from 12. It was all one material. It was all made out of tchelas. It was all one thing. And that one material, each string was made out of 12 strands, 12 threads woven together. So the Gemara says, how do you know that? The Gemara says, because it calls it kalil techeles. Kalil techeles means kalil is a plural word, which is like gidil, and therefore it has to be twice. And it says the word tcheles. Tcheles we've seen in other places. Tcheles we've seen in the paroches. In the paroches, the tcheles there, each tcheles string was made out of 6 threads spun together. So here also, each tcheles thread has to be made out of 6 threads spun together times 2, because the word klil comes to 12 threads spun together for each string, and those were all woven together to form the me'il. So Gemara says, well, how do you know that you should learn it from the tcheles of the paroches, where each one was 6 threads woven, spun together to each string? Maybe learn from the rimonim, the pomegranates, and the bells at the bottom of the me'il, that those were made out of 8 strands woven together. Those were made out of 3 materials each, and each one was 8 threads woven together, spun together to make each string. So why don't you learn from there? So Gemara says, no, because those aren't cloth, those are kalim. So we learn from the cloth of the parochas to the cloth of the me'il, not from the kalim of the rimonim, the bells and the pomegranates, to the cloth of the me'il. The Gemara says, what do you mean? The bells and the pomegranates were hanging at the bottom of the me'il. You should learn from the me'il to the me'il, from the bells and pomegranates of the me'il to the rest of the me'il, rather than learn from the parochas, which is cloth. So Gemara says we have a different source for it, and that's as we'd seen on the daf yesterday. The Torah used the word sheish 5 times for 5 different types of materials in a row to say that each one of them had to have 6 threads spun together for each string, but it didn't have to say it did not have to repeat the word sheish, and we explained what each of them was for. One of them was to show that other materials, each string has to be made out of 6 spun together. So here also that's the source for this. Each one has to be 6 spun together, and there's 2 of them together, so it makes 12. That's from the word kalil. The Gemara now moves on to discuss the next cloth, and that is the paroches. Paroches, we had said, was made of 24 threads. There are 4 materials. Each material is 6 threads, 6 threads of each material. The Gemara says that's clear. We know that everything is supposed to be 6 of each material, and therefore 6 times 4, 24 threads altogether in each string that was woven, that was spun together to be woven and making the paroches. So there's no problems at all. However, the Gemara discusses now the choshen and the ephod. Those it says was 28. So where do you get 28? So Gemara says 28 was the 4 materials plus gold. In addition to the 4 materials that they had, they also had a gold strand put in each of those 4, for a total of 4 gold strands added to the 4 materials. Now each material was a set of 6 for 24, plus you had another 4 in each material, and therefore you had a total of 28. The Gemara says that it says explicitly by 1. You learn to the other from the phrase v'asisa chosh mishban ma'aseh choshev k'ma'aseh ephod ta'asenu. You should make them the same. Therefore, you learn them both the same way. That's one source. The Gemara has another source. The Gemara says they have the pasuk that says v'kitzeitz pasilim. You should split the threads. Pasilim is plural, and v'kitzeitz means to split it. So you should have twice as many. So plural, twice as many as plural is twice as many as 2 is 4, and therefore you have to have a total of 4 threads. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to discuss a number of other halachos. Here, the Gemara says that somebody who tears any of the big kahuna violates a lav, like the pasuk says, lo yikorea. Where does it say that? It says that when you make the neck of the me'il, you should be doubled over the layer. Lo yikorea, it should not tear. Someone says maybe it means that you should do that in order that it shouldn't turn. That it shouldn't tear. How do you know that it's saying that do not tear it? There's an isser, do not tear it. The Gemara says because it doesn't say shelo yikareya in order that it doesn't tear. It says lo yikareya, do not tear it. On a similar note, the Gemara says somebody who removes the choshen from the ephod, the choshen was hooked onto the straps coming up from the ephod, somebody who removes that, or somebody who takes the poles out of the rings of the aron, violates a lav because it says lo yaziach. V'lo yaziach hachoshen me'al ephod. The choshen should not come off the ephod, and it says v'tabas aron yu abadim lo yusuru mimenu. The poles of the aron should be in the rings. Do not take them out. So Gemara says again, how do you know that it means do not take them and do not remove it? Maybe it just means you should put it in firmly, make it stout, and it should fit snugly so that it shouldn't fall out, shouldn't fall off. That's what it's saying. Gemara says if that would be true, then it should say shelo yaziach and shelo yusura in order that it doesn't fall and in order that it doesn't move. But it's not what it says, so it's coming to tell you that you violate an isser if you do move it. Now the Gemara says, though, that they did slide. The poles of the aron did slide back and forth. They were loose. How do you know that? So Gemara quotes of Yosef Bar Chanina and a brayso that corroborates that exactly, because a pasuk says two contradictory things. It says v'huva as ba'dav v'tabais. It says that when they traveled, they would bring the poles into the rings. Where it says that you can't take them out. So you can't take them out. How do you put them in? So obviously you put it in the right place. It's there all the time, meaning it had knobs on the ends, so it was there all the time. It couldn't be removed completely, but it could slide around, and therefore you had to move it into the exact right spot. Okay, the Gemara asks, why does the Torah refer to the walls as atzei shitim omdim, shitim wood that are standing up? The Gemara gives three explanations here. Either that they are standing, they should be built in the way that they stood, roots down and branches end up. That should be the way that it stands. Another side is that they hold up their layer, their overlay of gold, which was very heavy. They can miraculously continue to hold up. They didn't crumble under the weight. And the third explanation the Gemara says is that it keeps up Klal Yisrael's hopes. You may think that it's been destroyed and it won't come back, but no, atzei shitim omdim, they will stand forever. Our hopes and our prayers to Kadosh Baruch Hu will stand forever. Now the Gemara discusses why is the Big Day Kuna, why is it called the Big Day HaSarod? What is pshat on the word sarod? The Gemara offers two explanations. Number one, sarod is from the word sarid, meaning a remainder, a remnant. And it means to say that if not for the big tikkuna which brought kapara to Klal Yisrael through the karbanos that the Kohanim were able to bring, there would be no hope for Klal Yisrael, there would be nothing left of them, there would be no remainder. So these cloths, enabled to be there to be a remainder of Klal Yisrael, enabled us to gain kapara. Second shot, the Gemara says, is that they were woven not like ordinary cloth where you weave an entire bolt of cloth and then you cut it to fit whatever you need. It was woven to the exact size that it was meant to be. There was nothing extra left on the loom after it was removed. It was all in one shot. But there was some extra bit that needed to be woven and then added on later. So that's from the word srid, that it was woven complete except for something extra that had to be put on. Gemara says, what was put on? Gemara says they had to add on another piece with a needle. Gemara says that can't be. We have a brayso that says there was no needlework involved in the big day kahuna. It was all woven together. Gemara says that's true for the beged itself, for the main body of the cloth, but the sleeves had to be sewn on afterwards, and they were sewn on afterwards, and they reached perfectly until the hand. The Gemara now discusses the making of the aron. The aron was a box on the bottom and four sides, and then it had a lid on top that was the paroches. Now the box itself was made out of three layers. The middle layer was wood, and the inside that was a layer of gold, and outside that was a layer of gold. So the Gemara describes as how it was made. The Gemara says Batzal, who designed it, made three boxes and placed them one in the other. The innermost box was made out of gold, the middle box was made out of wood, and the outer box was made out of gold, and he placed them all together, and then it was formed in the proper way. What were the measures? So the aron was supposed to be 10 tefachim high. So the Gemara says that the inner wooden box itself was 9 tefachim. It had a thickness of its floor of 9 tefachim, and it rose to a height of 9 tefachim altogether. So the gold box inside that, its outside walls measured 8 tefachim, because minus the floor, the thickness of the floor of the wooden box, it had another 8 tefachim, so that its walls would rise to the same level, flush to the top of the gold of the wooden box, which was the middle. And the outer box was measuring 10 tefachim because it stuck up another tefach above the two further inwards boxes in order that it overlap the paroches, in order that it overlap the kaperes which should be surrounded and covered on all sides by the outermost wall of the gold of the Aron. So Gemara says, this all makes sense, but what about according to the opinion that says that it was 11 tvachim high, the outermost gold box? Gemara says that opinion holds that the thickness of the floor of the gold box was also a tefach thick. The first opinion holds that it was just a thin layer of gold. The other opinion holds that it was a tefach thick gold. That's why it rose to a height of 11 tvachim, not 10 tvachim, including the thickness of the floor and the thickness of the extra tefach to stick up around the kapores. The Gemara says that it was actually a little bit higher than 11 tvachim. What's that little bit? The Gemara says we wanted it to stick up higher than the kapores in order that it forms a crown, what the Torah refers to as a zer. A zer should be a crown around it. That's what it's for. So now the Gemara says there are actually three kelim that had a zer. There was the Aron, which represents the crown of Torah. There was the Shulchan, which represents the crown of kingship. And there was the Mizbeach Hazav, which represents the crown of Kahuna. So Gemara says these three crowns were claimed by the three people who represented each of these. Not that the actual physical crown was claimed, Rashi explains, but that they took that malucha, they took that role of leadership. Aaron, who was Kahuna, he was responsible for the crown of the Mizbeach. David HaMelech was the crown of the Shulchan, the kingship, and the crown of Torah learning is free. It's open to everybody. Anybody who wants to take and claim it and become an expert and become great in Torah can do that. Now you may think that therefore the crown of Torah, the crown of the Aron, is the least valuable, but the Torah itself says, Bi malachim yamluchu, I myself, I the Torah, I crown kings, and therefore the Torah itself is greater than all the kings because it gives crowning to all of them. The Gemara moves further with its Agadic drashtus, comparing the Aron to Talmidei Chachamim and Torah studies. So the Gemara says that when referred to the zer, the crown, it's spelled zar, stranger. So is it a stranger or is it a crown? So the Gemara says, Rav Yochanan says it depends if you study Torah properly or not. If you are zeicha and you do it the right way, not for wrong intent, you do a lishma, then it becomes a zer, it becomes a crown for you. If ever you do it for the wrong kavanah, that becomes a stranger. It is forgotten by you and it's a zar. It is strange to you. Next, the Gemara points out that the Torah uses conflicting words about making the Aron. And one, it says, V'asu Aron aseshitim, Klal Yisrael will make the Aron for Moshe, who's going to assemble it. Another one, it says, V'asisu l'charon aseshitim, you have to make it. It says, which is it? Do you make it or do they make it for you? It says, a Talmud Chacham should have his work done by other people so that they can, meaning the work which is his should be done by others so that they be able to support him and he should be able to learn Torah for their sakes as well. Says the Gemara further, why is it that the inner layer and the outer layer was gold? The Gemara says this is to teach you that a Talmud Chacham has to be the same on the inner and the outer. He cannot be presenting one external view of who he is while being somebody else inside. The Gemara says further, if somebody does present different views of his inside and outside, and as a Talmud Chacham, he's called nisav, he's called disgusting, like the pasuk in Eov says, Af ki nisav v'nalach ish shosek hamayim avla. Someone is disgusting, the man who is shosek hamayim, drinking water, referring to learning of Torah while he's doing an avla, while he's really doing something that is wrong. Says the Gemara further, what is the meaning of the pasuk in Mishlei that says, Lama zeh mechir bi'ad ksil liknos chachma v'leiv ayin? Somebody who tries to purchase wisdom, but he has no heart inside. The Gemara says that refers to somebody who learns Torah but does not have Yiras Shamayim. That is as if to say the entire reason for the learning of the Torah is to bring a person to Yiras Shamayim, and this person doesn't have the Yiras Shamayim, and therefore it's a waste of time over there. The Gemara says further, what is the meaning of the pasuk that says, Lama zeh mechir bi'ad ksil? What is the price? The hand of a fool, likna is chachma, to buy wisdom, v'lev ayin, but he has no heart. Gemara says this refers to somebody who studies Torah, but he does not have Yiras Shamayim, as we have been discussing, does not have fear of Hashem. The Gemara says it's comparable to somebody who builds a door to his house, but he has no house. The entire point of the Torah study is to bring him into Yiras Shamayim, but this person doesn't have any, so what's the point in having the door if you don't have the thing itself? The Gemara continues and says that Rava used to say to the Rabbanan, please, I beg of you, don't get Gehenim twice, don't get Gehenim in this world and the next world. Don't get Gehenim in your suffering and toil for Torah in this world, but then if you end up not having Yiras Shamayim and not keeping it, you'll get Gehenim in the next world also. So do me a favor, get it only once. If you're going to struggle in Torah in this world, make sure you keep it so that you don't have any trouble in the next world. Similar vein, the Gemara explains the pasuk that says, "V'zosa haTorah asher Sam Moshe." This is the Torah that Moshe placed. Sam is also pronounceable as Sam, meaning a potion. The Gemara says if you use it correctly, it becomes a potion for life. Use it incorrectly, it becomes a poison for the opposite. Chas v'shalom. The Gemara says, Rava says as well, that somebody who's omila, somebody who uses it correctly, it becomes the sama dechaya, an elixir of life. Someone uses it incorrectly, it becomes the sama de musa, a potion for death, a poison. Says Rashmal bar Nachmani, name Rav Yonason, in the contradiction in the Pesukim, it says Pekudi Hashem Yishar Mesam Chelev. The laws of Hashem are straight and make the heart glad. On the other hand, it says Imras Hashem Tzerufa, that the word of Hashem is painful. It causes suffering and Gehenna. Where says it depends. If you are Zeicha, use them correctly, it brings you joy. Incorrectly, you go against them, then it brings suffering. The Shaka says the pasuk itself says that. It says, it can be trufa. It can be trufa to life, to bring you to life, or it could be trufa to bring you to the death, depending on how you approach it. Yiras Hashem Tahora Medas Law. The Gemara says, what does that mean? The fear of Hashem is pure and stands forever. The Gemara says that refers to somebody who learns Torah in purity. How do you do that? First, he gets married so that he does not have draw to Avera, and then afterwards is the time to learn Torah. Torah also says, Eidos Hashem Ne'amana, the testimony of Hashem is truthful. What does that refer to? The Gemara says the Torah itself will testify to those who learn it and those who deal with it correctly. Okay, the Gemara now refers briefly back to the weaving of the designs on the Yerios, the various cloths of the Mishkan. And in some places it's called a Ma'aser Rokem, and some places it's called a Ma'aser Choshev. Some places it's called woven, and some places it's called planned out. So Gemara has two explanations as to what these two things are. Rabbi Elazar says Rokem means that they first colored the cloth in the pattern that they wanted, and then they wove it in that spot. And Rabbi Nechem, so that's Choshev and Rokem. Gemara says there's two types of things. One is that it was colored, and one is that it was sewn with needles, and one is that it was woven with a mixture of threads. If it was sewn with needles, you would have the same image on both sides, because it was patches of cloth that were sewn together in a pattern. If it was woven, you would have different images on the two sides. One side could have a lion, one side could have an eagle, which they were able to do through their great weaving skill.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.